You don't have to put on the red light.
Hello Jude, welcome to the table.
Hi Gary, thanks for having me, mate. I really appreciate it.
You have some of the work in our current exhibition called You Don't Have to Turn Off the Red Light, but It Helps. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're presenting here.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a series of images, sort of in two categories really. I have one sort of larger image, which I took in Falls Creek quite early in my photography journey. It's my first 3 or 4 rolls, to be honest with you. And then another series of 1:10 prints, which I've been working on recently, which I find particularly interesting as a format, and then bringing them to life in the darkroom. I find it a bit unusual and sort of visually and sort of personally interesting to work through that and sort of prepare things that are maybe not as common.
1:10 is very small.
It's tiny.
It's terrifyingly tiny.
It is.
What do you, from 1:10, what do you find interesting about it? As a person who also shoots 5x4 inch.
Yes, two opposite ends of the spectrum, perhaps.
A whole roll of 1:10 is not a 5.4.
No, not even close.
So what is the attraction?
To be honest, the original attraction was the cameras itself. My early journey was quite gear-oriented, actually. As a bit of a nerd and a bit of a techie kind of person, I was sort of intrigued by design and the interesting format and ergonomic of different 1:10 cameras, and that's sort of initially what hooked me in. And then when I started actually shooting it, I was really impressed by the quality that you could get. I think often people have dismissed 1:10 cameras and the 1:10 format, but you can get quite good results, with good framing and good lighting and a reasonable lens. And I enjoy pushing the boundaries with what you can do with perhaps overlooked equipment. That's maybe a bit of a theme in some of my work.
Let's now jump back to the beginning.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood and your growing up.
Sure. I think, like a few others, I've grown up quite rural in the country. I'm from a small town called Kerrang in the bush. And interestingly, I was one of only really 2 or 3 sort of ethnic families at the time. So my mother came and married my father in the early 90s. And there was only really a couple of non-white families in the town. And that was a large part of my upbringing, to be honest with you, sort of being a bit different, fitting in, and sometimes looking inwards on, sort of from an outside perspective, looking in on others and other interactions. But I actually did have quite a positive upbringing there. I felt quite accepted in the community, and I felt really supported in that tight-knit space. But I also spent a significant amount of my life traveling and in the Philippines. So I sort of had this juxtaposed life where my schooling as a child was in this rural country, bush town, but then my summer holidays for 2 or 3 months a year, we were in a small sort of regional Filipino city. And we had sort of reasonable housing, and our family was relatively well off, but I was also very in tune with people that weren't. I saw poverty and hardship from a very young age, and a lot of those experiences from the ages of 4 or 5 sort of framed, I think, my upbringing and how I saw the world as well.
So which city are we talking about?
My family's from Cagayan de Oro City, which is in Mindanao in the southern Philippines.
Not a lot of Australians have a lot of knowledge of the cities apart from Davao, because that's the only one that made the news, and we have a don't go order from the Department of Foreign Affairs.
Famously, yes, Davao, the home of former president
Mr.
as well,
Duterte, yes.
and some dynamic political happenings in Mindanao as well.
Mm-hmm. When did you first become aware of photography?
From a relatively young age. I think culturally, and my family had quite a large interest in photography, but really what I'd consider happy snaps or family photos. It wasn't uncommon to be in the Philippines with my siblings and my aunties and uncles, and you would have 5 aunties or uncles, each with their own little point and shoot CCD digital camera, all shooting hundreds of photos a day. And the end of a weekend trip having 1,000 family photos, half of them with thumbs in it or kind of wonky. And that was my sort of introduction.
What attracted you to the medium?
Photography for me, perhaps if I go on from that, it's sort of a natural segue in that in my teenage years, I started to think more creatively, perhaps. I had perhaps a traditional, stereotypical Asian upbringing where my family focused very much on science and math, and I was supposed to go to medical school or become a lawyer. And that never really sat right with me, I think even from a child. But I sort of pursued that for quite a long time. And so creative sort of pursuits in my childhood weren't really encouraged. I don't think my parents dissuaded me, but they certainly weren't rushing out to buy me art supplies or enroll me in a painting class. However, something they did tolerate was a bit of messing around with the camera and taking photos on trips. And that's what I started doing as a teenager. And then what sort of kept going with that was I felt a way that I could capture or control something a little bit or impose my own desires onto that in a way that I'd struggled with, with painting and drawing and those other mediums. And it felt challenging. I've certainly tried painting and drawing and have an interest in it, but trying that for the first time as a, later teenager or young 20-something was quite challenging to me when I didn't have that foundational skill in it. So that really sort of led to my early interest in photography, but I actually put it down for about a decade after that.
So your parents would be very impressed that you're sitting beside an operating table at the moment that has this sort of doctor medical feel to it, even if it is 1950s vintage.
I think that's a great way to look at it, and 1950s vintage describes a lot of my family, I think, as well.
Do you remember the first photograph that mesmerised you, that you went, this is something really important that I need to participate in?
Yeah. As a teenager, I was quite the sort of humanities nerd, perhaps to my parents' chagrin. But something that always stuck out to me in school and in media were a lot of those iconic images from history. And I'd find myself reading a textbook or learning about something in class and, staring at an image in a textbook for half the class while everyone else was doing the questions, right? Mm-hmm. And I forget the photographer, but the earliest image I remember being struck by was that classic New York high-rise image of the workers on the steel beams. And that I was probably in grade 6, maybe, or year 7. And then I remember seeing that in a book and then just asking my teacher questions about the image and how that was captured and who was there. And they didn't have any of the answers, right? But I went to the library because we didn't have internet at home, and I Googled that image and I learned about it.
Mm-hmm. Who are your photographic heroes?
So I was thinking about that on the way in. So I put down that sort of initial dab in photography as a teenager, and I went to university, I trained as a teacher, and I sort of forgot about it. And I've actually only really been into photography more heavily for about 2 years, maybe 18 months. And to be honest with you, my real exposure to that has been locals in Melbourne, meeting people, shaking hands, running into people in the street. And it's a lot of those photographers that I really started to follow their work and get an interest in, particularly, personal connection. I'm sure we're all aware of like Mark Forbes, for example, but my introduction to his work was meeting him at a stall at a show and then shaking his hand and talking about his book. And then I would go home and I'd learn more about his work. People like Bernie Cram and their work, meeting people in person and learning about their work and then taking it away and following it up and then having a conversation with them later. That was really my initial inspiration and what inspired me to do things. More recently, I'm starting to branch out, maybe a little more academically, and explore more photo books and international work. But I don't have a sort of a technical or theoretical background at all. And that's something I'm excited to explore and pursue further now. I have so many recommendations of photo books from friends and family, and I balance that with not having the space to juggle hundreds of photo books either. So, you know.
My collection is now about half of what it used to be.
Really?
Yes. It's quite out of control. What areas of photography do you inhabit, and which ones do you want to inhabit?
That's a really good, bit of a curly one. I think I sort of mentioned only really heavily shooting for probably 2 years, and I think the majority of that had been me sort of trial and erroring different ideas and different formats and bouncing around between different things. And it's probably the last 6 months where I felt more focused in my work. And a large part of that is things like this exhibition itself, things like the District Darkroom community, and it's made me pause and look back over what I have been doing and apply a more critical lens to that. And something that without the community and without these kind of spaces, I'm not sure I would have found quite as quickly. So I guess I'm currently sort of working towards that and shooting intentionally and curating work a lot more specifically, perhaps this year as opposed to the previous year.
So within that, what themes attract you? What themes do you resonate with?
Sure. I think I'm certainly drawn to people and situations and spaces. That interests me. Not particularly. I enjoy sort of, there's quite a vibrant Melbourne street photography scene, and I do enjoy a lot of that work. But sort of what I like to shoot or what I enjoy is, I think, images where it feels as if the viewer is looking inwards on something that they're not a part of. And that's not necessarily a negative either. I think a lot about the perspective of looking in on something that's sort of separate to you, or not necessarily your moment or your space. And then within that, I think about, how those scenes are composed, or how I compose them as the photographer, and that might be a natural scene. I think the large print I have at Falls Creek is sort of an example of that. It's someone else's moment, and then I'm sort of looking inwards as an outsider. But I'm also being quite mindful to not get into that moment myself, and I think about myself as a bit separate to that. And that kind of imagery is what I tend to be drawn to.
It's interesting because one of the strategies for artists at the moment in photography is to show something that hasn't been seen before, is where you have access to a subculture, to a place, to a group. And an excellent example of this is the European photographer who ended up running with the Yakuza in Japan.
Wow.
And because they were going legit and they wanted somebody to help them with this story. And he ended up...
The PR image.
Yeah, but he ended
perhaps.
up with photos of the funeral of the Don in amongst this. He was able to capture things that had not been seen as photographs before. They'd only been replicated in cinema or on television.
Wow.
And so... that's been a strategy along with categorizing or cataloging really within the art community, and I find it interesting that you're discussing this. But I'm curious, is this something at the end you were explaining is something that you're not part of, that you're looking at other people's world from the outside? Is there a sense that you also do the same thing from inside, where it's your group, where it's your culture?
I would say that there are elements of that, and that's certainly something I'm interested to explore further, for sure. Particularly, you touched on culture there at the end. I was raised in Australia, and my majority of my time was here, but I do feel a strong cultural affinity to the Philippines and my homeland. And I'm certainly, a dream trip for me would be to spend however many weeks or months traveling the islands and sort of forming my own impression of that and photographing that along the way. It's certainly a dream of mine.
Mm-hmm. Now, the question we love to ask, and photographers who come here love to answer. Tell us about your relationship with gear.
With gear? I would say my relationship with gear has become decreasingly important over time. So it's sort of perhaps what I alluded to earlier. One of my initial grabs into photography was this whole world of equipment and formats and ideas. And I went from, in the space of a few months, I went from my first 35mm camera to a 110 camera to trying to figure out how to make 35mm work in 126 cameras and other things, and 127, and 3D printed adapters, and doing all this kind of stuff. And then I got my first medium format camera, and that was really an initial part of my journey, was exploring ideas and formats. And from a technical geeking out perspective, that really interested me. And that sort of culminated in 4x5. I'm a pretty keen Polaroid shooter as well on the side. And those things are always there, I think, but recently that's becoming less important to me, and I'm focusing a bit more on what I'm trying to tell with my images these days. Though I certainly enjoy this concept of telling or making pictures with different perspectives with different gear. So you'll often see me with 3 or 4 radically different cameras in the bag, and I think sometimes about how each of them can lend its own different flavour to what I'm capturing, and I often do that as well.
Yes, each different format, each different style allows completely different feel.
Oh, 100%.
Which I find interesting.
Some of my favourite images personally, and things that I don't share quite as much, are my little 110 flash happy snaps with friends, in cafes, in concerts, and those things where if it wasn't a 110 camera that I could slip in my jean pocket, that image would have never been made.
Really? You don't slip like a full-fledged Nikon with a 70 to 150mm lens into your underwear, pants and socks in order to get them into a concert like I used to back in the 80s and 90s?
Well, I'd like to, don't get me wrong.
It was very uncomfortable walking through the security, I tell you.
I bet.
So what are your current tools of trade?
Currently, I'm shooting. I've been very blessed, and I've on permanent loan to me is a Hasselblad 500cm from a family friend. So to cut a long story short, it was a bit of an estate find, and I've spent the last few months sort of restoring it and replacing parts and getting it working again. And composing in 6x6 has been a challenge for me, a very interesting challenge, which I'm enjoying a lot.
It's very hard not to make a square look good.
I am finding that. So in a sense, I'm shooting less now than I was before, but I certainly find I'm enjoying the images proportionally more in that sense. So the Hasselblad you'll see me carrying around, because to be honest with you, I just want to shoot and get confident, get comfortable, and work on that. And I've always got my SX70 in my bag as well. Something people have asked me when I've mentioned the 6x6 thing is they say Polaroid is square. The negative, the image size is not that different to 6x6, isn't it the same thing? And I'm still thinking through that because I don't have a good answer yet, but it does feel quite different in a sense.
With a negative, you can blow it up large. With a Polaroid, it doesn't look good blown up.
No.
Apart from 665,
That's
which is not really a square.
That's one of my... I wonder if I was born a generation too late sometimes. As I would have enjoyed some of those older Polaroid negatives, I think, in that experience.
Now, we discuss mostly the actual cameras.
Sure.
What's your film stocks and developer stocks?
Yeah, so...
If you're shooting black and white, particularly.
Definitely. I've definitely shifted to black and white over time. I think as a lot of people of my age or this era, that I started shooting Ultramax, right, primarily for various reasons, cheap, available. But over time, I just shifted more and more to black and white, and these days that's almost all I shoot. Occasionally a color roll here and there, but that's where I'm at. And a large part of that has been my engagement with the Darkroom, with District Darkroom and Bernie and our other friends. And then it leads to developing at home and then scanning at home. And it's that end-to-end process I'm really enjoying right now, is that control and that accountability and ownership over the whole process. And that's led to, half a fridge full of black and white and 2 rolls of colour in the butter container. So within that, primarily HP5, just for versatility, to be honest with you. I find myself in a lot of varied situations, or I don't necessarily know what I'll be going into before I go into it, and I find a roll of HP5 is quite handy in that case. My actual favourite black and white stock is XX though, personally. I've shot a few rolls of that, and there's something I really enjoy about it, and I'd like to shoot that more. But yeah, sometimes availability can be a bit tricky, and I'd like to explore that a bit more.
I found the XX to be really contrasty, but very hard to get a really even toned printout of.
Yeah, throughout the whole image.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can find that as well.
It was a bit on the wacky side. Having grown up with various tech pans and very low speed films.
Oh, certainly. And it's
So
got
I
an old
tend to
emulsion.
use Delta 400 in the same way you use HP5
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
because the grains are a lot finer.
Certainly.
Major reason.
But I'm quite open to different stocks as well. I don't particularly try to pigeonhole myself either. I do enjoy, similar to the gear, I do enjoy trying new and different things, and I'm wary of becoming sort of complacent or stagnant sometimes. I like to try a new thing every now and then and see what's the go, or try a different way of developing, for example.
What projects are you currently working on?
Yeah, I'm actually pursuing an interest in motion right now as well. So I've been dabbling in Super 8 the last little while and taking that a bit more seriously. Starting to pick up an interest in 16mm as well. But my end goal with the motion is not particularly to make a feature length or anything like that. What I'm actually interested in is sort of mixed media, and then presenting images and sort of cinematography alongside each other and putting things together in different ways. And then you can throw in the layers of how do I combine SX70 into that? Where does the 110 frame fit into this? So I'm interested in mixing these different formats and medias, but in a cohesive way in terms of the story and the narrative, and then looking at different lenses to pursue that. And of course, more darkroom stuff. Every roll now these days, I'm doing a contact print, I'm filing it away, I'm planning what I want to print in the darkroom, and I think that's going to be a bit of a constant thing for a while.
Mm-hmm. So that's part of your long-term goals. Do you have other long-term goals in terms of your photography?
Certainly. I think my big long-term goal is to continue focusing and sort of, pun intended, perhaps zeroing in a bit more on a style or a niche. I find myself doing a lot of different things, and as I've said before, the last year I've been more focused in my work, and I hope to continue that as well. I don't really have a plan to ever perhaps work too much in photography. I've dabbled in working in, when I say work, I mean sort of professionally or semi-professionally. I've dabbled in monetizing my interests and hobbies before, and I've generally preferred to sort of separate some of those things. But I'm certainly interested to keep exploring and learning and trying different things. There's a lot of film photography projects around the world right now in terms of formats and new films and processes, and I'm quite keen to explore and see what those next few years look like in, that trope of the analog resurgence, and that's what really excites me right now.
So with making projects, you don't necessarily need to stick to trying to do all cameras, all films, or everything.
No.
Tracy Moffat showed us that we can just go, this look for this project, completely different look for this project, starting from a blank slate, completely different look. Each of her projects does not look like her previous projects. So the way of telling Tracy Moffat's work is you have to look at the name, or go, oh, that could be Tracy Moffat, that's her themes, rather than that's her look, which I find quite interesting. Now, you mentioned before that you went to university and did education.
Yes, that's right.
You're a teacher?
Not exactly.
Not exactly, pray tell.
So yes, I did do teaching as my undergrad degree, and I'd spent time doing sort of contract work. So I did some CRT work and maternity cover, but a lot of respect for classroom teachers. It wasn't really for me. I saw the writing on the wall that it would be something I'd do for a few years and get sick of it and go and open a cafe in Brunswick afterwards. So I sort of preempted that and got out of that earlier. What that led to was sort of still an interest in teaching and learning and education, where I got a role at sort of one of the big universities in Melbourne. And that's where I work now, doing sort of teaching and learning, education, design, supporting academics and teaching staff with design and delivery of materials. And that lets me apply sort of my educational and teaching background, but also keeps me at arm's reach from the actual classroom itself.
So tell me, how does an education in education affect how you see photography and how you practice photography?
So that's an interesting one. I've not thought about it like that, but I think a thing that I was always quite large on in teaching was this concept of social constructivism. And I think about that a lot in terms of photography. And when I say social constructivism, I'm talking about learning in collaboration or with communities and groups of people, and how we think about ideas, and how we learn and benefit from each other. So a lot of my own practice and just my life and things I enjoy are with others and with groups. And I feel so fortunate to live in Melbourne, where we have spaces like this. We have, community groups all over the city. There's a new film lab every month. And so in terms of photography, I think a lot about the community of people. I think a lot about sharing knowledge. I think a lot about learning from each other. And then the ways that that sort of benefits both myself as an individual, but also allows me to contribute a little bit back. And that social aspect is quite a large part for me, to be honest. I think, and I think if I was shooting by myself and not sharing anything and sort of just keeping it to my home darkroom or home space, I'm not sure I would have grown or have sort of be where I am now without that.
And one final question.
Sure.
Who is one photographer that you admire that the listeners may not be aware of and should be?
Ooh. There is one person I'm following pretty closely at the moment. It's a photographer, I believe they're North American based, Rafael Gonzalez. I sort of stumbled across them in my online perusal. They have quite sort of contrasty cityscape work, and it's been a bit of an inspiration to me in terms of different formats, where they do video, they do a bit of Polaroid. So that's been something interesting to me, and that's a person I've been sort of interested in some of their work recently as well. Someone else is Liz Potter, who's I believe Texan-based photographer, and she does quite a lot of interesting different formats and mixed media kind of work as well, and those are sort of the spaces of where my head's at right now as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for chatting at the table.
No worries, Gary. Appreciate
Cheers.
it.